Welcome to Teaching That Counts, a podcast dedicated to the teaching and learning of mathematics. I'm your host, Abel Maestas, and I love to talk about math education. Together with my amazing guests, we'll explore several topics in the world of math teaching and student learning. Whether it's building thinking classrooms, healing math trauma, building student and teacher math confidence, or creating more equitable math workspaces. If it's going to help students learn math and teachers teach math, then we'll talk about it. So if you're a teacher, a parent like me, admin, or a coach like me, I hope you find something that can inspire you and help build your practice listening to this podcast. You can always find us online at www.teachingthatcountspodcast.com. Yeah, I know that's long, but hey, that's the URL. You can find me on YouTube at Maestas Math or on socials at Maestas Teach. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. Well, hello everybody. I hope you all have a wonderful had a wonderful February, and you're not in any place that's too cold out there. I know in my region it's well, I'm not going to say, because those of you that are in the cold weather are probably going to say, well, what is he doing in California talking about 70-degree weather? Not quite 70 yet here where I am at, but it's been a pretty nice February so far. Well, welcome back to the podcast. I am excited again. Like I say, every month I'm excited to share with you my guests and the discussions that we have. For those of you listening, I am also looking to chat with some teachers that want to share their experience on the podcast using building thinking classrooms, 5 practices for orchestrating math discussion, anything like that, and you want to share your experience with everyone else. I am looking for anybody that would like to share some things. So if you are interested in sharing, hit me up on Facebook, or either through that BTC Facebook link, or you can go to my website, teachingthatcountspodcast.com, and you can also email me. Actually, it'd probably be easier to message me through Facebook, and I'll get back to you. Love to hear what some teachers are doing out there and how their experiences are going. So in this month's episode, I welcome one of the math coordinators at the County Office of Education, the Stanislaus County Office of Education, to the podcast, Christina Rubalcava. And Christina has been doing some amazing work. Her and her team have been doing some work with rolling out the California framework, the brand new framework that will be rolled out here to all the districts across the state soon. And text, I'm going to say textbooks, but really I should say curriculum resources are coming out soon. And so it's super important for teachers to really understand the language of the framework and know what's coming, because it's going to be different. The last framework that we had, it focused on the standards and what the standards were. And this framework really focuses on how to teach those standards and really looking at pedagogy rather than content. So I'm very excited about the framework. I know if you've been listening, I got to talk to Jo Bowler about the framework. She was one of the co-authors. And so just some great stuff that I think is very needed for our community here in California. And I think many of you out of state, those of you that listen that are not from California, I think you can get a lot of out of that too. If you ever are interested, go take a look. There's some really great things in the chapters of the new California math framework. We also talk about BTC, so that she's been doing a lot of work with our county in building thinking classrooms and really just looking at how do we connect different styles, right? Using the 5 practices, connecting building thinking classrooms with current curriculum that we have and the new curriculum that's going to be coming out. On that, we really focused most of this episode on a topic that her and I have really been discussing, and I think I want to dive deeper into this at some point, maybe even do a presentation somewhere at a conference, but I'm really thinking about the difference between integrity and Fidelity as it pertains to using a curriculum resource or written curriculum out there. So we talk about the difference between using a curriculum with fidelity and using it with integrity, and what that means for teaching and teachers as professionals as they make decisions in their classroom that are best for students. So I really encourage those of you listening out there to think about that. When you're using your curriculum, are you using it with fidelity, or how are we using it with integrity? And making sure that we're not just, we're not given a curriculum and we're saying, well, this is just a resource, right? It's more than a resource, but it's also something that we may not, depending on our students, we may not want to teach the curriculum to fidelity because we need to make some more decisions. We need to do some different things for our kids. So I hope you enjoy this episode. It's really been on my mind, this difference between fidelity and integrity. And if you have any questions or comments, remember, don't be shy to reach out. You can always get me on the website and on the Facebook link. Okay, hope you enjoyed this conversation with Christina Rubalcava from the County Office of Education. Okay, so we are here, and I am in our county office, Stanislaus County Office of Education, in this beautiful little tiny room. And I am joined with my guest this month, Christina Rubalcava, from our county office. She's our what is your title here?
I am a math project coordinator.
I was just going to call you coach, but you help me coach a lot too. So I'm super happy that we were able to meet because I know that we've been working together for a few years.
Yeah.
We've done some presentations at conferences, and I've been wanting to get you on. Every time we meet, we talk about stuff.
Everything, yeah.
We talk about everything for a long time, and I think, oh man, I wish I just had all my stuff here, just recorded it, because all of these would make great podcasts. So I'm super happy to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So so we got a lot of stuff we could talk about.
Yeah.
We always do. We always have a lot of stuff we could talk about, but I wanted to start with BTC because I know a lot of the listeners, they are building thinking classroom teachers, or they're thinking about doing it. They listened to the first season, and that was a book study. So I know that we've been doing a lot of work, at least in our district, but I know that it's been spreading around the county.
Yeah, for sure.
And a lot of that has to do with the work that you've been doing here, you and your team. So
yeah.
What's the status of that? How is it going in other places? And what are you guys doing here at the county to provide opportunities for teachers to learn more about BTC?
Yeah, so we started with what we call our BTC 1.0 workshop last year in November. And we were to capacity and actually even expanded it and had almost 50 people in the room. We had some district leaders join, which I think was fantastic. So they had a better sense of what shifts they were going to see when they walk into a classroom. How's that going to look different than what maybe they've experienced in the past? And due to that overwhelming demand, we ended up adding a workshop last spring as well. And that, again, filled up. So lots of interest, lots of people reading the book, trying some things, joining the Facebook groups. And so this year, we started again in November with another round of 1.0, which again filled up and over capacity. And so we've really been thinking a lot about how do we support teachers who've had that overview, who started by reading the book, have tried some vertical whiteboards, but they need that next step. How do I refine my implementation? And so we offered a BTC 2.0 at the beginning of February, I think on the 4th, and really had teachers come and we dug into thin slicing.
Nice.
And we dug into consolidation. And so they got to experience, a non-curricular task. What does that consolidation look like? Then we dug into a curricular task from start to finish, including giving them a check your understanding. So they could see that. And we talked through what are some tips for thin slicing? How do you take your adopted materials for your curriculum and how do you refine it?
Oh, that sounds familiar.
Sounds familiar, yeah. Sounds familiar. And thank you, because you let me use some of your video. We actually engaged them in the task that they then saw you teach with students. And so they had an opportunity to compare. I did my consolidation a little differently so they could see how you chose to select in sequence, and I did mine more as the teacher scribe. And what's the difference? How does that look different? And so some really good conversations. We started talking a little bit about grading and data. And now, based on the teacher feedback, they want to dig even more deeply into thin slicing. So now we know, okay, we're going to refine that and give them some more time to practice implementing, like pull a lesson from your curriculum. What's the starting point? How would you back up so there's an entry point for all students? How would you extend it? Those kinds of decisions.
Right.
So.
And was that K-12 or was it 7-12?
This one was 6-12.
6-12.
Yeah. So we've this year in our fall workshops, we did building thinking classrooms. We had lots of increments. So we did a secondary, and then we had a elementary version. And so we're thinking about offering another 2.0, maybe for that younger grade span as well for those teachers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm finding that I love thin slicing. That's my preferred. I'd say it's my preferred method, but it is my preferred method when we're doing something that is algorithmic or skill-based.
Yeah.
And it got me wondering, like, if teachers like seeing that thin slicing, and I think it's because we see mathematics as a lot of skills.
Right.
So I'm thinking about BTC 3.0.
Yeah.
Because I'm actually doing a BTC 2.0 for my district as well later on, in March. And the thin slicing is great because they get an opportunity to really pull back where the kids like low floor. But if you always do thin slicing, which I know there's a couple of teachers that are always thin slicing, then when are the opportunities for kids to take bigger non-curricular tasks, right?
Yeah.
So more open tasks that aren't thin sliced but thick sliced.
Yeah.
as they would be.
Yeah.
So I really think it's important for teachers to do both, because students are going to need those bigger, meatier problems at some point, especially when they get into AP, if they do AP. But besides that, the performance task is a big, meaty problem.
Yeah, for sure.
So I've been thinking about that as a BTC 3.0.
Yeah. Something I was thinking about actually, even as I was doing the workshops last year, was that it feels to me like people see either it's a non-curricular open task or it's thin sliced.
Right.
And I think there's a middle ground. There are sort of curricular open tasks.
Yeah.
Right. I think, I know a lot of our teachers are using Open Up Math, which was MVP before. And so how do I use some of those tasks to get students engaging when there's more divergent thinking or divergent strategies to get started as an entry point into a unit? And then, I can follow that up with some thin slicing to build some skills or to build an algorithm or a particular strategy. But giving students that opportunity to dig into those math practices a bit more, thinking about making sense of problems, thinking about structure, patterns, all of that. So I think there needs to be a balance.
Yeah, I often find that Open Up resources, and I love it, but it does lean more towards the what I'm calling thicker sliced problems. Yeah. Which lends you kind of need to thin slice some things in there. Right. So teachers are struggling with planning, putting that all together.
Yeah. I did an example from the Math 2 curriculum and showed I kind of went from an open task into a thin slice lesson. But what I did, it was about really setting the stage for completing the square. And so they were finding the area as a binomial squared and then as a trinomial and those kind of partial areas. And I actually started it with algebra tiles and sort of a concrete representational abstract and had them do it seated in groups and make some sense and notice and wonder. And then as we got some, kind of background knowledge, they were making some observations, noticing some patterns. Then I used the rest of the problems in that task to thin slice and move towards, by the end of this, what patterns are you noticing? What's happening to that middle term? How are you finding that, that C term? And so it was sort of a hybrid of a task and a thin slice.
Right.
And that was an example I shared with the participants at our 2.0 workshop we didn't actually do it in class, but I think if I was going to do the workshop again, I might talk through my thought process of here's what the task looked like initially. Here were the choices I made. Here's why I made those choices. What was I trying to get at, from the students?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love, just for clarity, because I know some people go to these workshops and we use these. I like the slips of paper. That's my preferred, is to use cards or slips and give students the problems one at a time.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is not thin slicing. That is just a method to give students the problems.
Right.
Thin slicing is really when we're talking about bringing it to a level where students can all come in, and then we're giving them small increments that each increase in cognitive level.
Yeah, it's based on variation theory.
Yeah.
So, you can only see variation against a backdrop of non-variation. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, and my whole career, that's kind of been the method that I've been teaching.
Yeah.
Like, I throw up a problem and say, well, what do you guys think? And then I throw up another one and they, oh, you guys are too good. Let me see if I can get you with this one.
Right.
But I would be leading that discussion, where now we're putting it in the hands of the students.
Yeah.
And we're preparing those problems in advance and putting them up on the boards to do it and letting them think about it, instead of me being the knower of all.
Yeah, the holder of all the knowledge.
The holder
right.
of all the knowledge.
Well, recently when we were at NCTM, I think we were in the session together about thin slicing, and what I appreciated is that the teacher that was presenting was sharing that she actually asks her students, why do you think I picked that next problem? Keep that in mind. What is it that makes each problem a little bit different than the one before? So again, they're paying attention to that structure, and it's helping students have ownership of that variability. What is it about this problem that's different? So they're having to notice and wonder as they're thin slicing. And I think that gives them more, more of an authentic engagement with it. It's not just I'm getting through problems, but I'm actually paying attention to what's different about this problem. What do I need to notice? What might that change in how I interact with the problem?
Yeah, and we know that structure is super important.
Super important.
Super important. So we could talk about BTC a long time. Again, there's so many things on our list that we can pretty much have an episode for each thing.
Right.
But there were a couple things I really did want to talk to you about. We've been going to a professional learning network, or that you and your colleagues here at SCO have been putting on for the county.
Right.
And this PLN, did I do that right?
Professional Learning Network.
I get the
yes.
N and the L mixed up all the time. This PLN is for teachers to come and learn about the new California math framework.
Yeah.
And I had just talked to Joe Bowler, the last episode with Joe, which was awesome. And she talked about the new California framework. We had a quick discussion on that.
Yeah.
And what are the goals of the framework? Like, as you see it, because you started working with, you've read it
multiple
times.
Yeah.
And it's not it's a pretty big document.
Yes, something over 900 pages.
Right. And so I'm hopeful
Right.
that the new framework really guides our instruction for 21st century instruction. I feel like we're in 19th century instruction.
Yeah.
But what are the goals of that PLN, and what could teachers be doing to get prepared for the it's 2023 framework, but here we are in 2025, and we're talking about it rolling out next year. So,
right.
But let's suppose we're rolling it out next year. What can teachers be doing?
Yeah. So really our goal as we developed this PLN, the Professional Learning Network, was to help our districts, our teachers, our administrators to really delve in and understand what are the key themes from the framework. And how is that learning going to drive curriculum adoption? Because that's really where a lot of our districts are headed. And we've been in a holding pattern for so long. I think teachers are seeing that there's some shifts that are necessary, but they're not really feeling supported yet by their curriculum to make those shifts. So, we joke around, you don't go to a grocery store hungry.
Don't.
Don't.
It's not a joke.
You shouldn't.
Especially not Costco.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So same thing with curriculum. We're hungry for curriculum. We need to make really good decisions around what we're adopting.
Right.
So that we're not in this position again where we're not feeling supported. And so our goal was to help our districts to see what are those key themes. So really, I think about there's the systems level, and then there's the classroom level. And actually, our next session, we're going to really be digging in more at that systems level, kind of zooming out and thinking about the 3 dimensions of systemic change and how that could drive decision making at the system level. So using asset-based language about our students. What are they bringing to the table? They don't come to us empty vessels that we have to fill up. Right. So how can we take and honor what students are engaged in outside the classroom and build upon that? How can we actively engage them through investigation and connection? And that's a big theme in the framework, is that idea of investigating and connecting. And then really thinking about, when we're designing instruction, we also want to build cultural and personal relevance, so that, we always joke about going to the store and buying 50 watermelons. Those problems that we call real world aren't really authentic. Students don't really have a connection to them. So how can we develop a program that's actually going to feel relevant, so we don't hear that, why am I learning this? Why do I need to know this? So again, that's really at the systems level. And then when we have the 5 components of equitable and engaging teaching, it's really about giving students access. I think that's the key thing. So things like big ideas. Our previous framework was really after the adoption of the new standards. And so the goal of that framework was, what are the standards? Helping the teachers see what the math is that students are going to engage in. This framework is more about, how do we take those standards and how do we make connections so students don't see math as this disconnected set of tips and tricks.
Yeah.
And so I think those 2 themes, the systems change and the classroom level, are key throughout the framework, and every chapter connects back to and builds upon those components.
Yeah. Joe talked about the tips and tricks when we talk about fractions. He's like, when we're doing division of fractions with another fraction, it's the flip and multiply is like a magic trick to students. Right. They have no understanding of why or where it comes from. And a lot of times I think we fall into that trap of like, this is what we're supposed to be doing, but that's not necessarily the math. Like the standard algorithm, right? I was listening to another podcast, and they talked about the standard algorithm as being made for efficiency, not for conceptual understanding.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah.
And when are we showing that standard algorithm? It has shifted. And I think, when I think about just division in general, the standard, algorithm for long division, that's actually a 6th grade standard. But I know, I have a 7th grader and a 3rd grader that in 4th grade, they had an acronym for, dividing with the standard algorithm already, with very little conceptual understanding. And I'm not saying algorithms are bad. They are efficient, and they can reduce the cognitive load if I have an algorithm. But I think we get caught up in the quote unquote the standard algorithm rather than an algorithm,
it's
right?
Like Ohio State University.
The
Ohio State. The standard algorithm.
And so again, it's not to say that algorithms are bad, but it sometimes blurs the lines of whether students actually understand. And using my own son as an example, he was taught KFC, keep, flip, change to multiplication for dividing fractions. And unfortunately, he was then taking that trick and he was applying it to all fraction problems, not just dividing, because it's a trick for fractions.
Joe talked about that.
Yeah. And even still, I am very lucky that he is very self-motivated, and he's in honors math right now and very successful. But anytime it comes to a problem with fractions, he hesitates a little bit because he doesn't have that rich conceptual understanding. Percents, decimals, all of that, he doesn't have that same kind of hesitation. And it makes me curious, how do we develop that conceptual understanding, still honoring the students that are ready for that next step, and what's the right balance?
Yeah, Joe suggests visualizations is really the key, but just so everybody knows out there, our kids go to the same school. So we chat about that quite often. Our kids went through the same elementary school. I think our oldest kids are they go through the same middle school too. Right. So we're having similar experiences.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting though, because you're helping coach the teachers at the junior high that our kids are going to. So
yes, and it's been great.
That's fun.
Yeah, that I kind of will say, hey, I'm going to ask a mom question now. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, my son came home yesterday. He was like, "Yeah, I was we were standing up, and because he's at the boards, the
Yeah.
8th grade teacher is doing BTC." I just hope that, and I don't know how many locals listen to this, but I'm hoping that he gets a similar. I hope that the teachers at high school, my oldest son's at high school, and I know it's not that right now, and I'm little. I'm going to say this on a recording, but I really hope that the teachers at the high school that my middle son goes to, where my oldest son goes to, will start to take a look at the teaching and the engagement that he's been experiencing this year in math.
Right.
He's doing wonderful in his math class. They're doing some high level stuff, and it's all BTC, and he loves going in there and talking to other students about math. So I know that wasn't the experience of my oldest right now, and he's 2 years into honors. Yeah, I have air quotes, honors math in high school, but I really hope he does get that.
Yeah, and I think, having taught high school for a long time, I didn't really know about building thinking classrooms when I was in the classroom. But one thing I did engage with is the 5 practices for orchestrating productive mathematics discussions and discourse, and having group work and having students have to think and make sense. And I will say, honestly, my honor students were more challenging because they'd been successful in the system.
Right.
They were really good at algorithm. They were really good at giving me an answer. I know San Francisco Unified, they have some norms. And one of them that I really appreciate is answers are important, but they are not the math.
Yes.
Yes, we want to get right answers at the end of the day, but they're not the math. What's the thinking? How did you know? What decisions are you making? What are you noticing? How are you generalizing? Those, questions are the math. And so how do we help high school teachers that maybe didn't have that experience as a student, as a learner, to know how to engage students in that way and to respond in the moment when a student comes up with something you weren't anticipating. So that's a challenge. And my teacher preparation program certainly didn't set me up for success with that.
Yeah.
At all.
Well, and we think about our experience, and if we think, well, this is the way I was taught and it worked for me. Well, look where we are. We're math teachers now. So we're the exception. We're not the rule.
Right.
The system is meant to work for people like us.
Right.
It's not meant to work for everyone else, which is what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I heard Dan Meyer speak some years ago, and he called it the country club. There's a long list of things that will get you excluded from the club. Yeah. And, very few that will get you to be a member. Yeah. Right. And so how do we think about those barriers to the system or in the system and get more students access? Yeah. Right. We still, those students that have been accelerated and really are understanding the math, we still need to challenge them for sure. But what about everyone else?
Right. Yeah. Right. That's what I love about the math framework. I really think it's going to hit our goal to hit everyone else. Right. To hit all kids, not just the kids at which which teaching has worked for in the past. You talked about curriculum with math framework, and I know this is going to be a change. There's going to be some differences, I'm hoping and expecting, in the curriculum that are coming out from what we would normally see from big publishers. Right. And you also talked about how we are yearning for good curriculum.
Yeah, for sure.
So this thing has been on my mind, and we've talked about having this conversation. So I'd like to start having this conversation, and hopefully it leads to, I don't know, something bigger.
Yeah, something greater.
So there's this big push, and I think it's more of an admin push right now, to teach a curriculum to Fidelity. Right. And I think curriculum publishers also believe that we really want you to teach this to Fidelity. Right. And so we've been talking about using the word integrity. And what does it mean to teach a curriculum with integrity as opposed to fidelity? I think we really need a push towards integrity and not fidelity, but it's because there's a difference there. Agree. And again, I think this idea of fidelity comes from more of an admin and a curriculum designer lens, right? And not a teacher lens. If you ask any teacher, they're like, "Well, where's my ability to make changes? Where's my ability to see pieces of the curriculum and go, oh, I need to put something here. I need to do something here. I need to change this. And we see that with BTC. That's why we have done, we've done sessions where we're showing them how to integrate BTC practices into your curriculum that you're using. I get this a lot on my Facebook. Like, I'm using so-and-so curriculum, Big Ideas, or I am. How are you doing thin slicing if my admin is making me use the curriculum?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts? Let's first have a conversation about defining these ideas of fidelity and integrity.
Right. So I think I hear a lot of districts talk about a guaranteed and viable curriculum. So I think that's sort of the starting place. And again, it comes from a well-meaning place. We want to make sure that all students have access to their grade level standards. I think that's kind of at the core of this issue. And teachers aren't really trained to be curriculum writers, curriculum designers. So the hope is that if they're teaching from their adopted materials, they're going to be supported to teach their standards.
Right.
The challenge is that not all curricula are designed the same. Not all curricula actually do address the standards. Sometimes we see misalignment with their out of grade level standards. So an example we mentioned before was the division algorithm. Seeing it show up in fourth grade, that would be out of alignment. But if the teacher's teaching that curriculum with fidelity, they're going to teach that algorithm even though it's not their standard.
Or even worse, I have been looking at one, I won't name it, but I looked at one, and the integrated math totally leaves out an entire standard of recursive and arithmetic and geometric relationships in Math 1.
Right.
Because normally if you split it into algebra, geometry, algebra 2, it's in algebra 2. You use that to fidelity, you're skipping entire standards for Math 1.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so I think, I don't want to say none of the other content areas have this problem, but the way the math standards are written, they're at a different grain size than what I've seen and engaging with all the other standards.
Yeah.
Some standards in the math standards are really large ideas. You'll have verbs like understand, explain, know that. And some are very narrow and skill-based. And so if I'm treating each of those standards as equal in the curriculum design, then I'm not really attending to the rigor. I'm not really attending to the connections between standards. And I think that is a challenge for our teachers. And so again, coming from a really well-meaning place of wanting teachers to have materials that are going to support them to teach the standards at the appropriate level of rigor, I think that's where this idea of fidelity started from. But then you have this sort of grapple that teachers are being told, okay, we also need to, in our PLC conversations, attend to student data and respond to data. But if my program doesn't really have an intervention activity or an extension activity, then I feel sort of stuck. How am I supposed to attend to that variability in student outcomes and my data and make decisions when I have to keep attending to the pacing guide, attending to the lessons that I'm teaching, using all of the components of the curriculum and with an equal weight.
Right.
And so it doesn't give teachers that autonomy to make decisions based on the needs of their students. On the flip side, I don't think that we should say, oh, well, the curriculum's just a resource.
Yeah, it's not
just a resource.
It's our foundation.
It's a vehicle for teaching the standards. And so we do need to look at the components that are meeting and attending to that rigor. So I think this idea of integrity is making informed decisions based on student needs. I also think if we support teachers to better not just know their standards, but understand the rigor and the complexity and how standards connect to each other and sort of unpack what's the conceptual understanding and then what's the procedural skill that goes along with that. If we had a better understanding of that, then I think we could make informed decisions, intentional selections about which problem set I need to use, which problems are going to allow students to engage or, experience the math practices. So we don't want to completely throw it out, but having the autonomy to make those decisions, to respond in, to that in the minute data that I'm collecting for my students as we engage.
Right. This idea of integrity, I know that, there's some teachers out there that they want to pull from this and pull from that and pull from this and pull from that. And there's so many resources out. We've got AI that can create problems, which I just used AI the other day and I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing.
Right.
But we have to make sure that we're understanding that the curriculum resources that we have are not just a resource.
Right.
They are the foundation for us to kind of to follow. And then how are we supplementing within that framework is the important piece. One thing that I remember reading on, I think it was Ed Reports, is that when a teacher designs their own things outside of a curriculum, it is 80%, some percent. I say 80, but I could be throwing out just a number. I just want to let everyone know. I can't remember what the number was. It was high.
Yes.
That I'll say most of the time, the level of rigor goes down when the teacher designs those lessons.
Yeah.
And not only does it go down, but it goes down almost always for students of color. Mm-hmm. And it's not because we have ill intentions. It's just we know that everyone has different internal biases that we come.
Yeah. Intent versus impact, right? I intend to make this engaging activity. Right. The impact is that maybe I'm not hitting the level of rigor. Maybe I'm not attending to language. All of those other factors. Yeah,
we call it somebody called it a pobrecito syndrome, which in Spanish is "oh, poor baby."
Right.
So we're like so concerned about where they are that we don't hold them up to the standards and the rigor that we expect all our kids to do that.
Yeah. I had this conversation with a team very recently, and we were talking about this idea of freshman level math offerings. And what I found, in my experience is that we had students not being successful at the freshman level. And so what do? We're like, kind of what you said, that pobrecita, it's like, all right, students aren't being successful. We need to offer a class below ninth grade level to get them ready.
Yeah. Which that I voted against as a board member.
Yeah. In my teaching, I taught those classes.
Yeah, I did too.
And again, very well meaning. We see our students struggling and we want to step in and save them. And I think by doing that, we've taken the bar that was at a certain level. And yes, maybe they weren't reaching that bar, but maybe they were striving toward it. And now when I lower that bar to meet them where they're at, if they strive just a little bit less, now I'm lowering their access. And what we found is actually when we got rid of all the below grade level classes, the number of Fs at the freshman level math courses actually decreased, which seemed counterintuitive. Right. But that's what happened. And so if we keep the bar high, not all students might hit the bar, but if they're striving toward it, they're going to be better off than where they're at now. Now, that's hard. When we see students struggle and they're not being successful, when I have so much variability in my classroom, that's not easy. It's not easy to plan for. And we have students coming to us with different levels of engagement, different levels of, background knowledge. And so how do we support our teachers so that they can address that variability? I think we need to do a better job of giving them the time and resources that they need to do that. But that by stepping in to save them, we've lowered the bar.
Yeah. So we want to make sure we're using a curriculum research. We want to make sure that we're making a good decision when we're picking a curriculum.
Right.
That's, in my opinion, I would want something that's vetted by an outside organization like Ed Reports that meets the criteria of our state framework.
Yes.
And that has shown at least some success in other places that are similar. That's kind of hard to do when we're talking about new curriculum for
and
a
California
new framework
specific.
And California specific. Yeah. And that's the other thing is that many of these curriculum, especially if it's a big publisher, they make a curriculum to sell nationwide.
Right.
They're not going to make well, they'll make California's a big state, so they'll make some money here.
Yeah.
But their goal is to make some money off of their product, unless they're a nonprofit, which we know that there are several of those.
Right.
But they make this for the country. And we have very specific needs. We have very specific framework. We have very specific things going on in California.
Right.
And many times we get a curriculum that's adopted. And again with Fidelity, is that it might not meet the needs of California.
Right.
It might. This is where I love AI, to where AI can help us, is it may not connect with our kids in the Central Valley.
Right.
And the context. We want kids to be able to do context, but if it doesn't connect to their lives, then it's not going to help them at all.
Yeah, for sure. And I think about when we talked about those 3 dimensions of systemic change, that idea of cultural and personal relevance, an adopted curriculum is not going to be able to attend to all of the right. cultures, right? Because in different areas of even within California, it's going to be different. So again, if we say Fidelity and teachers don't have the autonomy to change the names in a problem.
Right.
Or change the context. So an example with, back to that example of the Math 2 lesson that I was doing with the algebra tiles, it was about a quilt. Yeah. Not really super engaging for our students. They don't know what a quilt is. Right. So I used AI to just, change this context. So I put in the standard, I put in the problem and said, change this context that would be something more relevant to 14-year-olds, right? And it spit out something that was a little more engaging. And so we were able to still attend to the same standard, same level of rigor. Actually, the activity they had to do was all of the same. It was just the context that changed. Right.
And this idea, this task about a quilt, I'm thinking in my experiences, when I was on the Navajo reservation, helping to teach some math there, that would have been a great task because it connects to their culture.
Right.
Where here in the Central Valley, I want something that probably it's closer to agriculture or something that we're...
Yeah, it ended up being a context around farming and planting. Yeah. It was a little more relevant to, to the needs of our students here.
So that's one other piece that we can differentiate between Fidelity and integrity. Here's the other piece, though, I think is super important, is that when we talk about integrity, there is when the curricular designers put a curriculum together, there is an intent in the order of the mathematics. There's an intent in the connection of the ideas. Yeah. There's an intent in the instruction. If it's a problem-based instruction, 5E model, there's intent. Right. That is the part I think that we need to be attentive to. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
And not say, well, I'm going to take this task and then I'm just going to do a direct instruction lesson on this task.
Yeah, and we have seen that a lot. I think, again, when we are adopting new curriculum, thinking about supporting teachers to know what does it look like? What's it feel like? What are the instructional decisions I'm going to need to make in the moment? And if we haven't done that, then we're going to fall back to what we're comfortable with, right? Because we want to feel successful as teachers, and we also want our students to be successful. Right. And that can be challenging, especially if students haven't had that experience coming up to us. As a high school teacher, I went from students having only been direct instructed to a problem-based curriculum, and that's a big shift, right? Right. And so, thinking about being intentional, I think you're right about the order, the design. I'm hoping these new curricula will attend to the idea of big ideas from the framework and making explicit the connections between standards, between ideas, and design their units in such a way that they will show those connections and that it's more apparent so that we won't feel the need to piecemeal and pull things apart and put them together.
Right. Yeah, I definitely, when I'm working with teachers and teams, I really try to coach them in keeping to the fidelity of a unit. If they pull a unit from, let's say, illustrative mathematics, then you really should think about what is the unit in total doing. Yeah. What is each lesson connected to one another? What is that assessment? Obviously, we backwards map. Right. But we're not going to take this entire unit and say, well, I'm going to do this one, and this one. Now, we understand there might be some time constraints, but how can I make sure that everything flows together?
Yeah, I think of it as what's the story of this unit?
Yeah, what's the story?
And then, every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So what are those key sort of benchmarks, to use that word loosely, along the way, and to develop my roadmap?
Right.
What's that learning cycle? What should it look like at the beginning of the unit? By when will they have mastered the standard? How many lessons do I think it will take to do that? And being intentional, again, in that design so that I know that I'm keeping the spirit of the unit, the standards I'm making sure that I've addressed, and giving students an opportunity to have some time for sense making as well as skill development.
The other part that I've noticed is that in the order of mathematics, every curriculum, I feel like every curriculum is different.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking high school mainly because it's my experience. So I have experience with a couple of different curriculums, and the order in which this one curriculum introduces and compares a couple of topics, I really, really like. I like how there's some comparison. I like where they start. I like how it opens up and leads into some thinking later on. And then there's another curriculum where I love the lessons, and I love a lot of pieces of the units, but I don't like that they separate these two ideas from one in the very beginning and one in the very end.
Right.
It's like the curriculum designers of each one just had different beliefs on which way to do it. And so how do we go about, like, if we have trouble with the order, how do we go about dealing with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the shift to the concept of big ideas is designed to help with that. So, I think what you might be talking about is this idea of arithmetic and geometric sequences, or, linear.
I was trying to be like coded, but yes, that's the one.
Yeah, linear, exponential. And, I've taught in lots of different curricula as well. I taught in an integrated system. I also taught algebra, geometry, advanced algebra. And I think sort of traditionally in the kind of AGA framework, we treat linear and arithmetic as a separate concept from exponential. I know in my Algebra 2 textbook, they were vastly different, chapters. I think one was at the beginning of the year, one was towards the end of the year.
Right.
But then we lose opportunities for, what are the patterns we're noticing? How are they alike? How are they different? We kind of have stripped away some of those by sort of de-integrating these ideas. And so I think the shift toward this big ideas approach, where we're looking for opportunities for connection, will help. The challenge, I think, is going to be, because our state is a K-8 adoption state, we're really only going to have materials reviewed up through Algebra or Math 1, since those are sometimes offered at the 8th grade level. We won't have an opportunity necessarily to have a list for Math 2, Geometry, Math 3, Algebra 2. I'm hopeful that the publishers that are submitting an Algebra 1 or a Math 1 will make changes in those courses so that their program flows. It wouldn't make a lot of sense not to.
Yeah.
But that shift to big ideas, the whole intent behind that is to show math as a connected subject. When we're talking about linear functions totally disconnected from lines of best fit, we're losing an opportunity for students to see, hey, this concept of the slope and the y-intercept, it has a meaning. What does it mean in this context? What does it mean in a data context? And so, in an ideal world, the curricula would support us to do those things, to make those connections. I think when it doesn't support us, I don't think it can be a teacher by teacher decision. I think it needs to be, a team thinking about what's our goal for instruction? What connections are we hoping to make? And using those to drive the decisions around, is this order appropriate? Or do we need to make some changes? And if so, how are we going to support students making those shifts? I think sometimes what gets lost is if, the homework that goes along with these lessons is designed to have spiral review, then when we shift the order, we're losing that opportunity.
Right.
So then we have to be intentional for how are we going to keep bringing back and touching back on ideas that we've learned previously. So that's something to keep in mind if we're shifting things around.
Right. And I hope that if there are any administrators, I didn't offend any administrators out there, but I hope that they start to think about this idea of fidelity and integrity and how they can support their teachers with that. So we've spent a lot of time talking a lot of things. This is a supersized podcast episode. I hope that we can get back together and do another one of these and get into some of these other topics that I thought about some more. And I really hope that I do think that this discussion is going to lead to some sort of presentation or some sort of something at some point. So I think people out there, if you're listening, if you have any questions on integrity and fidelity, well, we're going to continue this conversation because I really think it's an important piece as we start to move into some new curricula coming down, as teachers want to be feeling some more autonomy. And how do we do that with the pressures that a lot of us are facing in our classrooms?
Yeah, for sure. And, we're heading that direction in our professional learning network, really talking about this idea of instructional materials and what are our needs. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Christina, for joining me today. And thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.